The many secrets of Classic that we sadly never had the chance to uncover.
Blizzard built the biggest map for World of Warcraft ever, spanning 2 entire continents and more than 36 zones. It truly was a world to explore. The sheer size of Azeroth and the unknown of what was around the next corner was one of those things that made the game so interesting all those years ago. Sometimes you find a hidden enemy camp, sometimes a new quest hub, and sometimes you take the gate in Northern Redridge into Burning Steppes and get a fast track ticket back to the graveyard. Seeing a new environment, a cave in the distance, or the ever ominous
Alliance problems as always. Why does Horde never have these problems? Tell me.
skull level enemy were things that were exciting and kept you wanting more out of the game. But even with the size of the game and how much was planned, Blizzard still had to scrap or delay plenty of ideas. They wanted to do more things than time would allow them to, and eventually certain ideas were packed up and moved into expansions instead of major patches. Today I'm going to be taking a look back at a bunch more of the early ideas of vanilla that never made it into the base game, exploring what they could have been, and hopefully uncovering some more of the unfinished parts of classic WoW. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Everlegion. Everlegion is the ultimate 3D fantasy idle gacha RPG game, where you can collect and upgrade hundreds of heroes from 7 different factions in a beautifully designed world. Everlegion offers casual gameplay first, which fits seamlessly into your daily life.
I don't care about casual gameplay, you're literally showing me dudes. I want skimpy outfitted females that do spinny attack moves.
You can play whilst watching TV, during bathroom breaks, on the commute, or even during meetings. You can enjoy the satisfaction of progressing characters without having to fully invest all of your free time into it. Everlegion will soon be celebrating its 1-year anniversary.
You see that? See that? The ad suddenly got so much better. Wow, how easy was that?
From June 23rd to July 16th. And if you log in for 10 consecutive days, you'll receive 100 free draws. And you can pull incredible heroes like Garzak, who will kickstart your team to success. Everlegion features a huge, diverse cast of heroes with their own unique stories and effects, such as Brenia the Red Wyvern or Iathil the Blade of Shadows. During the anniversary, you can also participate in Meliel's Favor for a chance to win a complete set of heroes released in the past year and the upcoming one. Explore the Dragon Abyss, a special gameplay mode. Conquer the Dragon's Dungeon on the Gates of Hell difficulty to obtain epic dragon eggs. And challenge the final dragon boss in Pilferer's Blitz.
I, by the way, also had the sponsorship, but I denied it because they didn't give me already pre-made footage.
For huge rewards.
And I needed to log in.
Everlegion has a massive sign-up bonus too as part of this event. Use the unlimited anniversary redeem code ELANIFIRST worth over $100, including 30 pulls, 500 diamonds, 500k hero XP, 500k coins, 500 crystals, and 60 Aranella hero fragments. Many thanks to Everlegion for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. In Silverpine Forest, Horde players experience a story of a city that has been saved at the cost of unleashing horrors upon the world. I've been playing through this zone recently with the text-to-speech add-on called VoiceOver, and there is a lot more to it than I thought there was in the past. And Silverpine creates so many stories that are picked up in future expansions, such as Archmage Aragal's resurrection in Wrath of the Lich King, and of course the Worgen race and Gilneas becoming official content during the Cataclysm. The once great city of Gilneas itself is situated
when World of Warcraft stepped the line over fantasy to furry fantasy.
In southern Silverpine, and was a big point of mystery during vanilla. It was one of those big gates to nowhere that teased the later content in the game. Outside the gate, Alliance refugees camped in a sense of hope that one day the gates would reopen, whilst Horde players had to contend with the disastrous decision of Archmage Aragal to summon the Worgen into the world. And during nighttime, the residents of the nearby Pywood village morph into their true form. This is one of 2 areas in the game, that I know of at least, where there are different enemies between night and day, the other one being the graveyard in Moonbrook in Westfall, where there are vultures in the day.
Oh yeah, this is a thing. I completely forgot about it because I never thought, hey, why is it a Worgen and why is it not a Worgen at times? Dude, Wow.
And zombies at night. As for Archmage Aragorn himself, he has retreated into the depths of Shadowfang Keep, asserting himself as the Worgen Alpha and commanding his forces from afar. And during Classic, I feel as though the Horde see near enough their entire side of the story to its conclusion, that being
Yeah, and there's not a single story of the Horde wiping on this guy because he's super easy, but every time there's a wipe video happening in hardcore, it's the Alliance wiping on this dude. Well, it's usually the Alliance always wiping on something. Maybe it's Veiling Caverns somewhere, but that's probably, you know, literally first time they do it.
Finally defeating Archmage Aragorn himself inside of Shadowfang Keep, but Gilneas and the various Alliance outposts serve as mainly cannon fodder for Horde quests, rather than anything actually linked to the Alliance's story within the world. Later, the Greymane Wall would be shattered by the Cataclysm, revealing the nature of the more humane Worgen to the world, as well as Gilneas. In Classic, the continuation of this story could really go either way. You could have the Worgen regaining their sanity and returning as a race to the Alliance, or you find that Gilneas has been overrun by feral Worgen and has to be cleared as PvE content. Or maybe even Gilneas is something similar to open world city content, such as Suramar was during Legion. There are many different ways this story could go than how it went in Cataclysm, and I know it's all just speculation and stuff that sounds cool on paper, but that's what makes it interesting to me. If there is another big door teasing future content, it's the Colossal Gateway in Azshara surrounded by Firbolg. Except unlike the Greymane Wall, this gate remains a mystery to this day. We talked about Azshara a bunch in the previous video, and how there is a certain lack of content to be found there. It's a near enough endgame zone that feels as though it's been forgotten about in favour of more compelling stories in other zones. And if you check the classic map of Azshara,
yeah, there's literally like one quest chain there. It's not even a big deal, so it's kind of boring.
These Firbolg gates have even been officially drawn up onto it. It really all suggests that this place was meant to be something.
There was a quest, I think, to kill this one.
More than what it ended up being. There is even a rare mob that can spawn called Gatekeeper Rage Roar just outside of the gates too. On top of that, the gates themselves go directly into the side of a mountain, almost suggesting that the Firbolg are living under the mountain, kind of like dwarves would. And well, if you look at Timbermoor Hold on the Felwood side, we do in fact have a faction of Firbolg occupying the underground, where they've carved out a pathway between Felwood, Winterspring and Moonglade. Now there is something else which I've noticed here. The subzone that the Firbolg live in Felwood is called Timbermoor Hold, and if you stand in front of the gates in Azshara,
it's also called the faction. That's also the faction's name.
Also get a subzone called Timbermoor Hold. So if we link the dots and use, well, a lot of imagination, we can only assume that the Firbolg have a massive underground empire that goes all the way from Felwood to Azshara, and that these gates were due to be the entrance to it, but
isn't this, by the way, a giant cave system under Hyjal? I think that's probably it. It's just not finished. I think there have been people who got through this gate, because a lot of places like this, people have found ways into them.
It just never got finished and put in the game. Another point to consider here is that the player can become friendly with the Timbermoor Firbolg, who have managed to escape corruption, unlike the other Firbolg tribes that we encounter. So maybe it could even be quite a similar situation to Gilneas. Maybe the gates reopen and the Firbolg somehow, some way become an ally of the Horde. I mean, it's in Azshara, that's quite close to Horde territories, and I'm just saying in Cataclysm, the idea that goblins would fully pledge themselves to one faction never quite made sense to me. Alternatively, the Firbolg have shut off the gates for the good of Azeroth, as Timbermoor Hold had fallen to corruption, and they did not want to unleash the horrors that have been growing there. And in that case, we could have it cleared as PvE content with raids or instances. Either way, we never found out what was behind this set of gates, so it would be cool to see it one day. Next is a feature that was cut from a Horde race in vanilla, and would kind of make a return to an Alliance one in Cataclysm. This one. Plains running. Originally, this ability was what Tauren got instead of a Kodo mount. I guess Blizzard were thinking, how can we find a mount large enough to make sense for the Tauren model, which is fair enough. There were 2 NPCs where you could learn this race-specific skill. The quest text from CERN Pride Runner is still available on Wowhead's database, saying that you will be granted.
You also had the ability to pick up a bucket and milk the cows at a time. Okay, making that one up, but that's believable.
The swiftness of plains running. The other place where you could learn this skill was from a female Tauren that wanders Stranglethorn Vale, called Samantha Swifthoof. You've probably seen her on your journeys throughout this zone.
Have not.
And as Alliance, though she does show aggressive, she will not attack on sight, unlike other enemies. Just don't go hitting her for no reason, unless you want a PvP flag. The first version of plains running was seen to be problematic though. While standard mounts took 3 seconds to summon, plains running took 10 to ramp up, and if you stopped or entered combat, it would instantly fade, leading to this cool idea of actually being very frustrating.
Dude,
these limitations
so
were considered in the first place for PvP reasons. I mean, can you imagine a Tauren running circles around people at 100% speed once they gain the level 60 version of plains running? Because that could have been a very hilarious reality. Also, you could not turn plains running off. Once you hit that 10 seconds of running, your cow just entered nitro mode and started sprinting off into the distance. Or maybe into a pack of enemies, or maybe off a cliff. Yeah, it had 1 or 2 problems. During the
Wait, so you could really not just stop? Really?
Cataclysm, of course, Worgen got running wild, with a blue post at the time even referencing plains running. Running wild, however, just worked like a standard mount, having a cast time and increasing your movement speed by a set amount. I don't see why the idea for how running wild functioned couldn't work for plains running nowadays. I mean, I certainly want to see Tauren randomly sprinting across the world.
I mean, doing that in a dress seems a little bit awkward, not gonna lie there.
The project that was seen very early in vanilla was the Dragon Isles. For a name that's been known for as long as it has, it's amazing that it finally was brought to life in World of Warcraft's most recent expansion.
I mean, they're running out of ideas. They tried the Shadowlands, an original idea that literally demanded to retcon all of the existing lore in the game, pretty much, and make the jailer the 300 trillion IQ mastermind behind literally every move that everyone makes. Like, fucking Eisen looks weak in comparison to the jailer with his big Giga IQ brains. And, you know, his Giga IQ brains should not win, but he can literally win in an instant when he has everyone, like, cornered and whatnot. You know? That's big. That's big. And then they understood that maybe original ideas are a bad thing and Blizzard should never attempt it, so let's rehash old ideas. I wonder how that's gonna go.
Dragonflights. Originally, the Dragon Isles.
And the next one is obviously Emerald Dream.
Were intended to be a late game zone in the northern eastern kingdoms. There was also supposed to be raid content present for players between levels 65 to 70. This zone and or raid was also supposed to house temples of worships for various old gods that would serve as enemies for players. One of the most popular early pieces of concept artwork shows a fossil or squid-like temple with long tendrils extending outwards. During the battle for Azeroth, the Shrine of the Storm in Stormsong Valley showed very similar artwork to this idea, but just on a much larger scale. And as easy as it is to miss, this kind of artwork itself was included in Classic WoW 2. Well, when I say it's easy to miss, it is if you play Horde, because it's located in Darkshore. There is a subzone called the Master's Glaive, which show off the remains of a huge and ancient battle between an Old One and Stone Giants. Players are sent there to find out what the Twilight's Hammer are up to and to put a stop to them. This quest series eventually carries players over to Black Fathoms Deep to defeat more powerful cultists. The Dragon Isles were cut at such an early stage of vanilla that these days, if they were brought back, they could really be anything. Also, we already have a fight with one old god, Cthulhu, during vanilla, but maybe we do have space for a second. The next one I have is something that I'm sure nearly everyone's going to know about, but one that I'd like to include in the video, because there was a lot of work put into this area, despite it not seeing some form of release as a raid until TBC.
You can actually get in there.
And later as a full zone in Cataclysm. I am of course talking about Mount Hyjal. This subzone had quite a bit of design work in place already, and you can visit it in game in Classic, either through a set of tricky jumps or just spam Eagle Eye on a hunter. That's much easier. It's overall quite a linear zone, with one major path leading from the instance portal up the mountain. There are a number of...
Well, that's literally how the zone is supposed to be, though.
of blank open spaces that have been laid out as foundations for content, and perhaps biggest of all was the world tree showing Archimonde's defeat following the battle for Mount Hyjal. There is also physically an instance portal for Mount Hyjal in the game too, and that's located deep within Dark Whisper Gorge, but you can see the iconic swirly green entrance, suggesting that this zone would have been for a raid, but we have a gate just in front of it blocking access. Hyjal is a zone that we have seen plenty of after vanilla, and I'm just gonna say I could happily skip the raid version in TBC in favor of it.
Everyone has done Hyjal in some expansion at some point. It's absolutely insane.
Being a full-on zone in Cataclysm. I could see it being a zone in Classic though, for sure. As for what PvE content may fit in here, I feel as though you'd have to come up with something kind of new from what we already have.
That is true, because all the demons there are defeated.
Archimonde has long been defeated in terms of the story of vanilla World of Warcraft, so really the options would be open here. Next up, one of the most captivating stories told in World of Warcraft is that of the Ashbringer, but you really have to dig deep to find much reference to it in the game. Players fortunate enough to get hold of the corrupted Ashbringer from the Four Horsemen encounter during Vanilla Classic can take it over to the Scarlet Monastery to trigger a special event, where Scarlet Crusaders no longer are aggressive.
Very cool.
They believe the player is the return of the Ashbringer into the fold. After a rather violent interaction between the Scarlet Commander and High Lord Mograine, the player is able to speak with a redeemed High Inquisitor Fairbanks, who perhaps gives out the most interesting information of this event. He says that the corrupted Ashbringer is beyond redemption, but there is another son of Mograine to be found in the Outland who has the capability to forge a totally new one. This is of course referring to Darian Mograine. However, in the story of World of Warcraft, what Fairbanks says just doesn't happen at all.
No.
Instead, Darian briefly joins the Scourge before breaking away after the Lich King's betrayal at the battle for...
Look at the Lich King just absolutely smack and wag that guy like he's absolutely nothing, because it's true.
Lights Hope joined
Remember when power scaling was consistent? Yeah, neither do I.
The DK starter quest, and he just keeps using the corrupted Ashbringer instead of trying to forge a new one too. I think a lot of people want the idea of some kind of Scarlet Crusade raid or instance. This conversation with Fairbanks could serve as...
A lot of people wanted to cleanse the Ashbringer, and there was so much theories laid out by the community and people saying, oh, you can do this. People tried fishing literally everywhere. People tried fishing literally everywhere with the Ashbringer equipped. People tried to... Well, not really. Well, yes, really. People tried so many things, so many random things. This was literally trying to get the white lightsaber in Star Wars Galaxies.
As the start of something entirely new. Imagine it is a new late game raid after Naxxramas. You start off by finding the corrupted Ashbringer from Nax. You have to find Darian Mograine out in the world somewhere, though you may have to change the text about him being an outland a little bit. You forge a new Ashbringer as part of the raid. And what would be a more fitting legendary to add into Classic than a reforged Ashbringer? I mean, you could even get the unused Quell for Last Zone and the Sunwell involved in its reforging too. There is just a ton of lore and story built up in this area that would make sense for vanilla. Again,
was there a Sunwell in Classic though? I don't remember.
I'm just throwing out ideas, but there is so much grounds for great content here. Next is a zone where there is a big difference between the two factions, the Hinterlands. Now, if you are a Horde player, you probably really like this zone, and I can't blame you because there is
big juicy trinket.
There's a lot to get done here, elite quests, and many great quest rewards that will last you to level.
Literally best in slot trinket for almost all of Classic, by the way, is here, done as an elite quest in that stupid city. It takes a while, but there are so many people there because it's just so good. It has did it have crit or hit rating? I think it had hit rating and like 20 attack power or something huge, considering your second best option is a carrot on a stick.
level cap. On the Alliance, yeah, there's not quite so much going on, which is strange because there is a full-on Alliance faction that calls this zone their home, the Wildhammer Dwarves. In Classic, this is a faction that you can grind all the way to Exalted if you really want to through repeating quests and grinding mobs. It is, well, completely useless though. Seriously, this may be the biggest waste of time faction to get Exalted with. Not only do they not have a reputation vendor, but this faction also gets removed from the game at the start of the Burning Crusade, because, well, it just did.
Why are all these problems literally always Alliance? Why? How?
Didn't serve any purpose. The Wildhammer Dwarves will later be brought.
It's like the Alliance and Alliance players are like kind of a failed inside joke and experiment.
Brought back during the Cataclysm as a faction to appear in one of the new zones, the Twilight Highlands. It just feels as though there could be something more here than there currently is. Could there be more faction-based quests? Maybe a reputation vendor that sells mount-related items possibly. Also, the Wildhammer are famous for their ability to fly griffins. Now, I'm not suggesting flying, or even faction-specific flying, can you imagine that? But maybe there are ways you can improve the flight network, improve the speed of it, something like that. There is also a PvP sub-story in the Hinterlands too, though it is mainly a horde thing, where you're preying on various Alliance forces such as High Elves and Griffins throughout the zone. That's another thing we could talk about. High Elves,
yeah, this place sucked.
With the Alliance, despite only playing minor roles in the game as a whole. Anyways, there is this one-sided PvP thing going on, not sure how much could be added to it, because in terms of open world PvP objectives, they've been done in both Eastern Plague.
Yeah, this place sucked. There was some kind of mob here. I think there was 3 mobs that you needed to kill, and the spawn rates were trash. And one of these mobs was like super minuscule in amount compared to everything else, and was just an absolute pain.
And Silithus, and they have a tendency to be rather dead content due to the rewards not being there in terms of honor, gear, gold, and so on. The next one I have is a curious little cave entrance that I think most of us would have seen. Located just to the west of the Searing Gorge side entrance to Blackrock Mountain is a small blocked off cave entrance. The reason you'll have seen this quest entrance is probably when you're doing that one quest where you have to kill greater lava spiders. Now this cave is maybe just nothing more than a bit of scenery, or perhaps at some point it was meant to be something larger. The cave perhaps was a link down to the Altar of Storms on the Burning Steppes side of Blackrock Mountain. The Altar of Storms itself is very rarely visited, apart from players looking out for Black Lotus in the game.
Never have been there.
And in the lore, they used to be places of great power for the Horde. Biggest of all is that this mysterious small cave even has a name, Blackchar Cave. It feels like something was supposed to be here, but it was scrapped. All the same, I do kind of like having to go through.
There's a lot of cut content in the game.
Through Blackrock Mountain as the main way to travel on foot between Searing Gorge and Burning Steppes. So these days, this cave is probably just a bit of scenery. Next is a bit of content that feels as though it could have a bit more done with it, and that's regarding the Centaur reputations in Desolace.
This sucked. I was an idiot. So there's like this quest that you need to do to get like friendly or whatever reputation with one of the Centaur clans. And it's completely useless. It just makes you you just need to literally kill like, I don't remember how many centaurs, but it was something like 40 or something like that. It was ridiculously many, and I did that, and there was no reward at the end. You get duped. Do not do this. This is garbage. Do not waste your time.
So if you're a reputation enjoyer, you will know that during Classic it's possible to just about get revered through grinding mobs, then turning in quests with either the Gilneas or Magrant Centaur. In BFA there were changes added so the player can now hit Exalted to open up more reputations for the 100 Exalted Reps achievement. But in Classic you only get a couple of extra quests after having hit the higher reputation thresholds. What about getting a reputation vendor added with new things the player could get? There's already plenty of choices in professions for picking one or the other, such as gnomish or goblin engineering, armor or weaponsmithing, and so on. What if this was extended to the player picking Magram or Gilneas Centaur as a part?
And the worst part, by the way, about Desolace is the fact that Man, those centaurs are in the most boring place ever.
Of your character progression. You get ammo from one of the quest rewards. Maybe you could have one of the best tiers of ammos being behind Exalted with one of these factions, for example. Or maybe you could add some hunter pet food that reduces the damage taken from AoE, so your pet isn't completely useless in raids. Again, just some ideas. Next is a small island.
Yes, add more shit so hunters need to specifically grind for it. 10 out of 10.
Which is super easy to miss.
Oh, I
in
know
fact,
this
I wouldn't
one.
be surprised if you've walked past it a dozen times and never really noticed it. It's called Purgation Isle, just off
There's a Leeds there, if I remember correctly. Just a Tauren in the Leeds.
the coast of Hillsbrad near South Shore, and I'm kind of surprised this didn't end up being cut. Prior to patch 1.10, it was just a bunch of level 20 to 30 mobs occupying the zone, despite there being no quests here. Alongside of the release of the tier 0.5 quests in 1.10, the Isle was updated to now include very high level elite mobs. Even still, the only reason to go there was to farm Soul Ash as part of your tier 0.5 quest. During Kata, this Isle was overhauled again and made into a small quest area. Perhaps in Classic, Purgation Isle could be used for more than what it is at the moment, maybe as a higher level questing area, or a possible place for new items or profession patterns to drop. But there are several other islands that were present in early versions of Vanilla that did not make it into the live game, such as Gilneas Isle or the Isle of Dr. Lepidus. Both of these places were allegedly supposed to be points of interest for questing or leveling players, however they were both cut at some point in time. I think island-based content can be super interesting, and they make for a good natural break between regular questing and having that feeling as though you're going into a more dangerous zone. Perhaps the best example of this to me that did make it into the game is Alcaz Island. This place ends up being a part of the Scepter of the Shifting Sands questline and the home of a mini-boss, Dr. Weevil. Also, Varian Rin himself was held there prior to patch 1.9. He was located in a lower sewer area before—
Look at that femboy. That's literally your greatest warrior alliance. Sad.
Or being later replaced by a generic named mob. Maybe you could even bring back the storyline to free the king from the Defias forces in Dustswallow as part of an alternative narrative. I think if you can say one thing about all this scrapped or cut content is that there's a rather common theme of them being eventually used during the Cataclysm. And though Cataclysm as an expansion ended up being quite divisive among players, I feel as though it did build upon a lot of the ideas presented in early vanilla.
Well, of course it's divisive. You literally shreked the world that everyone loved so much. Obviously it's going to be slightly divisive, that literally history is being kindly erased. Which makes sense because, you know, in game you do quests and those quests technically should progress the world, but that doesn't really happen. And then you need an expansion to update the zones to how they're supposed to look after certain events happen.
And could certainly, in parts at least, be used for inspiration if Classic Plus or anything along that line would ever happen. In any event, there is a metric ton of story and potential in Classic that lays beneath the surface. And I know this whole thing is a dream and probably very unlikely, but I want to imagine a game where one day it's possible and we do get to see a whole other side of World of Warcraft. If you like the video and want to see more of its type, I do have a part 1 of this kind of video on the subject of scrapped or removed content that you...
Anyway, that's Willy right there. You see that? That's him. Anyway, this was Quizzer Sid. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.